Hi, I'm John Vini, a proud Eagle dad, and among my various scouting duties, I'm the Chartered Organization Representative for PAC Troop and Crew 61 in Worcester, Ohio, and I'm also the Killbuck District Advancement Co-Chair. Some of my previous scouting roles include PAC Committee Chair, Cub Master, and Scout Master. Over the next little bit, I'm going to give you an overview of unit budgeting. I put together a PowerPoint, so hopefully all of you can stay awake. And thank you for participating in Cyber Summer Camp. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off because you don't need to see me read this whole thing. And we'll get going. Before we get started, as a quick reminder, your unit is chartered by an organization, the chartering organization. And while as Scouts, we think of all of our stuff as ours. I mean, we usually raised the money for it, bought it, take care of it. It isn't really ours. It belongs to the chartered organization. This includes the funds that we have. However, it is ours to care for and protect. The unit committee specifically has this responsibility. Lastly, units are encouraged to have their own banking relationships. No matter our suggestions, at the end of the day, you should comply with your chartered organization's requirements. To help set a baseline of what we'll be talking about, here are a couple quick definitions from Lexico. I would expand on the budget definition a little by adding a written to the beginning. So it's a written estimate of income and expenditures for the period. And income, expenses, and expenditures are pretty self-explanatory. We all know that the success in scouting is planning. It's about being prepared. While not everything goes according to plan, scouting sure works better when you start with a plan. You've learned separately here at camp about putting together your unit's annual program plan. The budget is a logical extension of this process. It expresses the plan in numbers. During the budget process, you'll figure out the costs you will incur and how you'll pay for them, from sources of income to fundraising. We'll cover more about figuring out the various parts in a minute. Believe it or not, this is not an uncommon question asked in units. Usually you'll hear things like, why would we go to all this trouble and effort to create a budget? Our program is running fine. Or more likely, and we sure hear this one a lot, it seems like, we've always done it that way, so why change? However, many units, most leaders, and I'd venture to say nearly every scout and family have no idea how much it costs to run a unit or even the value they get for their money. Do you suffer with participation, collecting from parents, getting each member to even sell some popcorn? Have you ever had a family question why you ask for money? Have you ever had members of your unit question where the funds from the popcorn sales went? Have you ever looked at other units and wonder how they afford a trailer or high adventure trips? This list goes on and on. I bet I could ask each one of you and you could add to this list. Budgeting helps with these problems. Following the budgeting process helps us to be prepared. It helps the unit to be thrifty. That doesn't mean we have to be stingy. And especially since we're talking about money, a good budget and communication process helps to show that we are trustworthy. So a quick recap. As you can see, the budget is part of your annual program plan. It's the numerical representation of your plan. It helps the unit determine if and how to afford the fund. And it is all about having fun, isn't it? It will help scouts understand the cost of activities. I know, at the annual planning meeting, there's always that scout or adult who thinks you should take a weekend trip to France or serve steak at every camp out or have a family camp out in the Hamptons. And while a budget doesn't stop the ask, helping the scouts connect the costs of fun with the fun does help them better understand the possibilities and how hard they might have to work to make it happen. It helps families understand the costs as well as the value of scouting. I mean, who other than scouts can go to Washington, D.C. for $4 for 4 days on $75 and you still get a t-shirt? Once you've gotten families understanding the costs, imagine how much easier it is to get them involved in helping with the fundraising goals. You've connected the fun of scouting with the work of paying for it. And lastly, a budget helps build confidence that your unit knows what you're doing. Okay, so now, hopefully, I've convinced you all that a budget is needed. And now you're thinking, now who is going to do all this work? And listen for it, there it is, the pin drop. Never fear, scouting has that figured out. And it follows how leadership and units work. In a pack, like everything else, the parents should work together to make this happen. In a troop, the youth leaders should be doing this work. And just like youth providing leadership, they need a lot of help from adults. However, just like learning to be a successful youth leader, with the right help, scouts will also learn how to do budgeting. In a crew, of course, it falls on the youth leaders. As adults, we have to act as the guides and let the youth do the work. And just like in leadership, if your unit does not have a history of letting the right group do the work, it will be hard at first. When you build the expertise, you'll be amazed at how well this knowledge will be passed on. At this point, our audience falls into two categories, I suspect. The first group already does planning, budgeting, etc. with their unit. And unfortunately, I'm guessing those units are overrepresented here at camp. You already know it isn't too much work. For you, I've tried to work in a couple of bits of information to make your process better. Maybe you could share some of your success with other units. And the second group, those who have no idea if there is even an annual plan, let alone a budget, or are feeling a little overwhelmed at this point. You should have paid close attention to recruiting volunteers presentation elsewhere at Sabre Summer Camp. But don't worry, it isn't too much work. Once you've done it, it will be easier. There are really 6 steps to creating a budget, and I borrowed this from Brian Wendell's presentation in Scouting Magazine. The link's below. Feel free to read it yourself. He breaks the process of creating a budget into 6 steps. We'll cover them briefly and then apply them a little later in this presentation. Step 1 is to plan your unit's annual program. And really, there isn't even a reason to worry about a budget until you have a plan. What is your unit's vision for the next year or so? Since that's covered in a separate presentation, I won't get into the details of creating an annual plan. Just know it's the first step. The second step in creating your annual plan and budget is to not do it alone, but to make it fun. In reality, music and fun is probably better suited for the annual plan portion, but the budget grows right out of it and can be started as the plan is put together. This is a great opportunity to introduce adults into the volunteering process. As you work through your budget, ask them to help research some of the costs. If your unit wants to go to COSI, maybe one of the adults would not only figure out the costs, but help plan the trip. Like I said, I borrowed these 6 steps from Scouting Magazine. In reality, there are only 4 steps to the process. Step 3, of course, is developing a budget, and it is the hard part. This is when the unit needs to decide, in addition to the fun they want to have and what it will cost, there needs to be a conversation about other costs the unit needs to plan for. These include charter, recharter, insurance, recognition, consumables. You never want to run out of toilet paper on your trailer, or soap for that matter. It's really getting an understanding of how costs are incurred. What is the unit going to pay for? What are they going to pass through to the family? For instance, do you charge for a family camp out? Or do you ask families to bring food to share the load? Or do you simply incur the whole cost and include it as part of their annual dues? And step 4 is looking for projects. And in this case, I don't mean service projects like cleaning up a park. Those service projects are very important, and don't forget to record them. What we really mean are opportunities where your scouts may be paid for providing service, or more likely providing services. Locally, we have troops that participate in the Rotary Flag project where the unit is compensated for putting flags up and taking them down. We have units who are paid to help out on election night at the Board of Elections by providing labor to unload all the voting equipment and put it away. These are the opportunities that bring money into your unit outside of fundraising and dues. Finding projects works well when you involve lots of parents. They're usually the result of a parent who knows of a need. Step 5 involves fundraising. How are you going to fill the gap between your income and your expenses? We should all be selling popcorn. Once you figure out how much fundraising you need, then you can figure out how much popcorn you will need to sell and set a goal for your scouts' families. Good news, Tommy Tenderfoot, this year you only have to sell 200 tins. And finally, in step 6, you will communicate your budget and start working on getting commitments. Eventually your annual plan and budget will be completed. And at that point, you need to involve the rest of your scouts, family, supporters in letting them know what you want to accomplish. Feeling a little overwhelmed? Don't be. It's not rocket science. Let's continue on and look at some of the benefits. First up are expenses. Remember, expenses are the money you expect to spend for the fun, as well as replacing the things you use up or adding to the things your unit has. For instance, new tents. But where to start? What are all the things we might spend money on? Not to worry, it's scouting, and there is a form for that. Though, in this case, there doesn't seem to be a patch. Scouting says there are 12 areas of basic expenses you should be thinking about. We'll look at them briefly as we move forward, but if you don't have an existing budget to work from, this is a good starting point. It is interesting to note that about a third of the costs listed are the money that we have to spend each year. It's the costs we spend to charter our unit before we've even gotten to having fun. From there, the second third are all about how you get to the fun: advancement, activities, camping, program materials. And then the last third is really about the things that make your unit go and grow. Making sure you have the training. In my case, our troop pays for the first year leaders to go to Green Bar summer camp, and we pick up a little bit of NYLT for the youth that want to attend. Are you setting up a reserve fund? We've certainly learned in the last few months that it helps to have some money put away for a rainy day. And lastly, are you thinking about something you want to do in the future? Buy a new trailer, go on a high adventure trip, things you should start saving money for today, known as a reserve fund. Google it up. I'm sure you can download this form. But a note of warning, most of the online materials you'll come across have old costs for recharters. So when you do your budgeting, make sure you're putting in the right costs. Let's dig a little deeper, and in the next slides, let's start putting this all together. So hopefully it will make a little bit of sense. As we talked about before, a budget breaks down into three parts: expenses, income, and fundraising. Generally, it is easiest to start with the expenses portion of the budget. This will help you understand how much funding we will need, and we can always come back and rethink some of our fun. Sorry, there, I got lost for a second. Generally, it's easy to start with the expenses portion of your budget. This will help you understand how much funding you'll need, and you can always come back for the fun. Let's start with one part that's not avoidable: the chartering fees. For many units, this could be your single largest expense. And most years, it will be one of the easiest to figure out. Simply fill out how many scouts and adults you expect to recharter. This is also the first area to determine how you might pay. Does the unit cover the cost? Do you charge the family? Do they cover the family if the family meets some fundraising goal? For adults, is there some minimum participation to be registered on the unit's time? Example, if you camped with the troop at least twice during the year and provided leadership, we'll pick it up. Otherwise, we're going to ask you to pay. Next, you'll need to determine about advancement and court of honor costs. Personally, I've never actually broken this down by scout. We know that we're going to incur $500 to $700 a year in buying rank and merit badge patches for our scouts. Which brings up a good point. Most units shouldn't have to do this whole thing from scratch. Hopefully you already have a pretty good idea on a lot of your expenses, and you can just simply adjust up or down based on your unit size at that time. In the second third, you're going to borrow heavily from your annual plan. Put your outings and events down. If you're pack, these probably end up being your pack meetings. If you're a troop, these are probably campouts and trips. In either case, if you're running a year-round program, you should need to add additional rows for each month's activities. Don't forget to include district and council events you'll participate in. Lastly, as you work through the last third of the expenses, think about any special activity you're doing or other expenses you need to be thinking about. Obviously, you can make the budget sections as detailed as you need them to be. So let's go back to the top a minute and take an example from my troop. The first third of expenses, the recharter. We do our annual troop planning in August each year for the next calendar year. So we planned 2020 in August of 2019. Boy, did we ever miss that mark. Right after the annual planning, we also make some determination on how many scouts and adults we expect to recharter, who's going to age out, and who has not been involved lately. This lets us quickly fill in the first part of our annual budget. And a plug to make my commissioner happy. We also reach out to all those scouts we've not seen in a while, and we remind all those adults whose youth protection will be expiring by the end of the year to hurry up and get started on updating their YP. During our annual planning, we also made a determination on which campouts, events, and troops we were going to do for the next year. And because we've done this for a very long time and are blessed to have adults who've been involved for a lot of that, it's not a lot of work for us to estimate which events or trips will draw more individuals and which ones will draw less. We typically take a hotel trip in February, designed to bring families along and get parents involved. And about every other year, we take a family-oriented spring trip and we canoe in opposite years. Trips and summer camp are typically our largest expenses. However, we don't charge an annual fee or dues to belong. We charge for the outings, usually $10 to $15, and for the trips, $75 for the June trip. And we encourage all of our scouts to participate in popcorn sales and fundraising. The handbook line. Our troop buys the handbook and supplies for some patches for every Weeblo we expect to cross over. And hopefully, if our den chief is doing their job right, and the other work that we do to involve the pack with our troop, that we will have a good idea how many Weeblos are going to cross over, though we know it's rarely 100% in any unit. We have a troop trailer, and we budget for consumables that we use off of it and some other things. I mean, really, do you ever want to run out of toilet paper on your trailer? While it feels like a lot of work, I'll bet most of this information is already somewhere in your unit. And as you get good at this process, you simply have to do a save as for next year to get started. For units who are not accustomed to communicating out of budget, the annual program cost likely will open some eyes. What you've built so far, though, is just the cost that it takes to run your unit. And it might be more helpful to add a couple columns to this template and break down which expenses the unit pays and which ones are scout paid. As you'll see in this case, instead of needing $27,000 in fundraising, we need more like $6,000 in fundraising because the scouts or their families are picking up the participation costs directly. Income. Now that you have some idea on how much the fund is going to cost, let's start figuring out how we're going to pay for it. If you've worked a little further down in the worksheet, you can start to fill in your expected sources of funding. In addition to fundraising, units pay for the fund in a variety of ways, be it from their charter organization or dues or pass-throughs, maybe using up reserves if they have them. We'd like to think it's straightforward, but the reality is in most units, they're using some hybrid approach to balance it out. I bet your unit already has some form of philosophy and method of how you make it work out. However, it would be useful to review it from time to time. You know, has the demographics of your unit changed? And when it used to be an annual dues was the way to go, many families have a hard time with that, but certainly would be willing to work a little harder at selling some more popcorn to offset that cost. Just takes time to think about it once in a while. Make sure when you're working on your expenses that any surplus you're carrying from previous years, you've subtracted out money you're holding in reserve, be it for a new trailer or a future trip. You just want to make sure that you communicate the reason your troop is holding funds to be transparent. And now, down to the fundraising. Now that you have your income, you've got to figure out how to plug the rest of your hole. And we know that we can do most of it selling popcorn. We'd love to believe that we can make all the money we need selling popcorn. And for many packs, that's probably true. However, most troops and crews likely need some other sources of funding. And I'll bet most troops already have at least one other fundraiser they do: spaghetti suppers, fair parking, pancake breakfast, mulch sales, the list goes on and on. However, Before you just go out and raise money, remember the rules. It doesn't mean you can't do a fundraiser. It just means you have to make sure you follow the rules and do the paperwork. And no, there is no patch. Still with me? I hope. There isn't much more. You've worked hard as a group. You've gotten all the numbers filled in. You've come to some consensus on it. You know who's going to pay for what. Now you need to get around to getting people to sign off on it. If you'll notice on this budget form, it doesn't even have a place for your ASPL or SPL to sign off on it, though you've asked them to do most of the work in preparing it. So as you think through the ownership of your budget, you want to include the right people in the process and ask them to sign off on it. That way, they've had a chance to participate and they also have agreed. Remember, it's your unit's budget. The goal of your budget is to communicate how you will spend the money, how you will get the money, and to encourage participation in the process. So modify the budget layout to fit your needs and help you achieve those goals. And don't forget, the chartered organization also needs to approve your budget. How that happens is really up to your charter organization, and you should talk to your charter organization rep about that. Yay, we're all done. Everybody take a deep breath. You know, we worked really hard. We got a plan together. We got the right people together. We got a budget together. Boy, it feels great to be done, doesn't it? Maybe not quite yet, but we're almost done. But don't forget the most important part. Communicate your budget. Why do all the hard work if you don't get the rewards? Show that you are a well-organized unit. Get everybody on the same page. Encourage participation and be transparent. Oh, and it helps with your JTE points where there is a patch. Make sure you communicate your plan often. Talk about it, review it, update with your families. What was our plan? How are we doing against our plan? Where do we need help to meet our plan? So in summary, and we've reached the end this time, honestly, we put together the budget to support our annual program. We didn't do it alone. We even had a little fun. Yes, I know, only us accounting types think a budget is fun. We'll be communicating our plan every chance we get. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We either used last year's as a starting point or found a template on the internet. We'll make the popcorn kernel happy and we'll go work hard to sell popcorn and raise money now that everybody knows why they're supposed to help. And if we need a little more, we'll make sure we do the paperwork. Hopefully you've learned a few things to apply to the process. It isn't done in a vacuum and it doesn't have to be too much work. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your cyber summer camp.